Well, hello there and welcome to Mind Your Business. I am the host, Jennifer Anderson. I'm also the Executive Director of the Georgina Chamber of Commerce. Thrilled to have you joining here today and equally thrilled to have our guest on the show. As you know, over the last 10, 11 weeks, information has been fast flowing, and this show was created really to let businesses know the resources and information that are available to them at any time, but really right now, more specifically, as they're going through the pandemic and going through different changes with their business and organization. Joining me today is our York-Simcoe MPP. She's also the Minister of Transportation and the Minister of Francophone Affairs, Caroline Mulroney. Thank you so much, Minister, for joining us today.
Pleased to be here, Jennifer. Thanks for inviting me back.
Well, and it's important for us to invite you back to the show because, as I said, things are changing on a weekly and a daily basis, and we want to make sure that we have accurate and up-to-date information for the folks who are making decisions about their businesses and organizations.
Well, absolutely. I think the first time I joined you on this show, we were just trying to keep up with the new state of being, and we were really in the midst of trying to assess how we were going to live, how we were going to cope, how we were going to manage and contain this health crisis. But things have moved on, and now we're trying to survey sort of the economic impact that this has had on the lives of people across York-Simcoe and across the province.
And I think too, for everybody, it's difficult to assess the future when you're also monitoring the past, you're monitoring what's happening that week. I mean, there's just so many changes. And if that's happening for businesses in this community, it's definitely happening for the people who are making decisions about reopening, about the different phases, because you really have to monitor a lot of different areas.
Yeah, well, everything starts with monitoring the health statistics. This is above all a public health crisis. And so every decision that we made as we were shutting down the province was made based on the guidance of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. And similarly, the decisions that we're making about reopening the province are based on the guidance that we get from the Chief Medical Officer of Health. So this is an evidence-based process. It's not easy, but what is incredible about this, and we are all experiencing this, is that the decisions that we make ourselves for how we are going to conduct our days and our lives will have an impact on the province's ability to manage COVID-19. And so we say it sounds hokey, but we are all in this together. And so as we emerge and hopefully move towards a recovery period, there's a lot that we all need to do to support one another.
We are in phase one of reopening. And I want to talk a little bit about that because we are taping this on May 25th. So we are about a week into that phase one reopening. What was really the decision behind the first phase? Obviously numbers were okay, and we now have to enter into a phase of getting back to normal. And I say that very loosely.
Yeah, so I think as I said, this is a health crisis, and we issued the state of emergency on March 17th. Everyone stayed home, businesses were shut down, and we tried to really contain the virus. And we saw that we had all collectively done a good job. And the economic impacts of the work that we were doing were really starting to be felt. And so it was time, based on the decline of the numbers that we saw in terms of the number of new cases, that we could move into a phased opening, a cautious phased opening of the economy. And I sit on a committee called the Jobs and Recovery Committee that considers some of the issues that we need to discuss as we move towards the full reopening. And when we were looking at this phased reopening and what would be in phase one, we looked at businesses that could deal with some of the physical distancing realities, the new reality of life really is that you have to be able to have physical distancing. And so so people are still being recommended to stay at home, but we were able to open up retail for across the province with curbside pickup, and with that kind of physical distancing if possible. So there are a number of changes that came. Garden centers were opened, and I know in York-Simcoe that came as a big relief. Marinas were open so that people could actually get out on the lake, and those businesses could start to prepare for the summer and the eventual full reopening. So it was phased. It was done in a way that would give people an opportunity to get out and some businesses to get started again. But that said, we have to be conscious of some of the pressures that reopening will create on parts of our system. And as Minister of Transportation, I spent a lot of time focused on the pressure that the reopening will put on our transit system. And transit itself is changing in this post-COVID world. Certainly pre-vaccine, post-COVID, pre-vaccine, the business of public transit is very different. And we have to be careful about the stresses that all these people coming back to work will put on public transit and whether it can sustain it. So we want to be cautious, we want to be prudent, we want to be measured, and we want to make sure that we are doing it in consultation with business partners, economic partners across the province, which is what we're doing.
Right. In order to head into phase 2, we need to be successful at phase 1. Is that happening? Are we seeing that so far, only a week into the plan?
Well, I'm an optimist, and so I believe that when we announced the reopening phase 1 last Tuesday, so after Victoria Day weekend, that the guidelines that Dr. Williams had laid out, which would be 2 to 4 weeks from stage 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3, were achievable. The statistics we saw over the weekend were a little disheartening. The number of new cases had gone up. And we saw here in York-Simcoe and in Toronto, we saw people congregating as though we were in full stage 3. So we have got to do our part to contain community spread, to get those numbers down. As I said, the phased reopening is evidence-based, and we are following the advice of Dr. Williams. Ontario has done a good job. We should all be very proud of what we've been able to do in terms of containing the spread of the disease. Other jurisdictions have not been so lucky, and they've lost way too many people. And so what we're doing here is important. It's to protect and save lives. And as we're all eager to move to phase 2, I think we still have an opportunity to keep flattening the curve. But we have to do that, and this next week is essential. So if this airs on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I don't know what the weekend forecast looks like, but we really have to remember that we are not in a full reopened economy or society community at this time. So I hope we'll be able to move sometime in June, but I think we all want sooner rather than later. So we all just have to follow those guidelines.
Right. And certainly with each phase being 2 to 4 weeks, we are well on our way to completing phase 1, but it really is the results, as you said, the medical information that comes in the next week or 2 that will really dictate whether we need to delay that phase 2 opening.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So we're following the guidelines. We're following the medical advice. I know that people watch the Premier's Pest Conference every day, and many also watch the Chief Medical Officer of Health. It's like an emergency alert that people are tuning into on a regular basis, because these statistics have a direct impact on our lives and on our businesses and on our communities and on our future. So people are paying close attention, I know.
Right. It is a full-time job to watch all of them.
It is. You start at 11 with the prime ministers, and then the premiers at 1:30, and then the CMOH at 3. It can take up your whole day.
I know. You might be able to catch some lunch in there, but some days are pretty intense when you go from one to the next.
That's right.
That's just from my couch. But as our MPP, you are also living that. You are going through a lot of that information, delivering that information. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. I think for a lot of families, if they have been fortunate and their parents can continue to work and can continue to work from home, and they haven't been, their families are still healthy, this is an opportunity to see their children more than they normally would, because we don't have evening activities or weekend activities. So we get to spend a lot more time together. From a work perspective, I'm still working almost the same hours, I would say, but I don't have the community events and I don't have the political events. Those things have all shifted either to Zooms or they're just not happening. So the intensity is there because we have a lot of decisions that we have to make every day, much more than we did before. So my work seems to be more focused on my cabinet work as Minister of Transportation or Francophone Affairs. And I'm lucky as Minister of Transportation, I hold an economic portfolio, so I sit on the Jobs and Recovery Committee. So I'm speaking to stakeholders and my federal colleagues, I'm speaking to mayors across the province, I'm speaking to my colleagues, my provincial counterparts quite a bit to understand what they're doing, determine what best practices are, because we're making decisions that are really impacting key sectors of our economy as we reopen, and we want to get it right.
And that's, you're developing a recovery plan. That's what you're referring to in terms of transportation.
Yeah.
So it really is important to talk to those key stakeholders and those positions of influence when you're trying to figure that out.
That's right. I mean, just when it started, I would have I always was having meetings with stakeholders, but they became much more frequent. And, we were talking, for instance, to the OTA, the Ontario Trucking Association, as well as other truck drivers and other organizations that represent the truckers. And, early on, it's clear, they're a key part of our supply chain to making sure that we have medicine on our shelves and food on our tables. We need truck drivers to be able to do their work. And, through these weekly calls, we'd find out that they were being denied access to bathrooms, that they were being denied access to restaurants, that private rest stop owners were shutting down. And so immediately we took action to open up our seasonal rest stops across the province. We work closely with EnRoute, who's been a great partner, making sure their 23 EnRoutes are open across the province and that they're clean. Things like cashless transactions, which truck drivers typically not all of them carry debit cards. And so cashless transactions, which are being required by Tim Hortons and other food services, was a challenge for them. Working with CBSA, because although they're essential, they don't need to quarantine. Many were being told they had to. So early on in the pandemic, it was just trying to keep up with all these new issues that they were experiencing and trying to make sure that they were supported. So we did all these kinds of things, but then realized that as a government, we had to take all of those pieces and put it into a plan for the reopening and the recovery. And so the trucking industry works with the retail industry, works with our agricultural industry. And so as a cabinet minister on this particular committee, I have the opportunity to bring forward those issues, but try to make sure that they fit well into our overall plan, and that we put the supports necessary for the truck driving industry, the trucking industry, in context with other needs and demands as well.
It really is a puzzle because one decision really can't be made without the other.
That's right. And it's important not to make these decisions in a vacuum. As Minister of Transportation, I can direct the ministry to implement all sorts of solutions. I mean, I have to go and get approvals. But it's really important to think through what people are experiencing, because this is unprecedented. And I know that word has been greatly overused. But it's very important that we all have a chance to hear from our different stakeholders what the needs are, because we all want to achieve the same thing, and and we have to phase it in properly. Some things are more urgent. Some things need more consideration. Some need partnerships with the private sector or other levels of government. So it's an incredible exercise in policy development, but the urgency with which we need to be responsive is, I think that this is sort of what really is incredible about this entire experience. Is it's urgent for so many businesses, as we know, you and I, because we just did a call with the Georgina Chamber. We know how people are living through this pandemic and that their needs are great.
Well, and I wanted to mention that because it was a call with local businesses and organizations, and each of them spoke to you just about the issues they're facing, the impact that COVID-19 has had on their business, and what help they're looking for to help them flourish in the future. And that's important information, regardless of whether it's a chamber Zoom call or just people sending in an email. Knowing what people are looking for and knowing the struggles that people are facing help with some of those decisions.
That's right. I think what was great about that call was it was a very diverse group of business owners who got to share their concerns, what their plans are, how they're managing the reopening, how they're thinking about recovery. And there are some best practices that people are developing. This is there's no playbook for this, and people are trying to figure things out. And it's important to have a forum like the one you put together for people to share. And it's great for me to hear what people's concerns are, what government programs, which of the government programs that have been introduced are working, what the gaps are, what we can do better. And so some of the things that we heard, that we discussed on that Zoom call are things that I will bring back to the Jobs and Recovery Committee. I mean, things like, the commercial real estate support plan. I know we know that it's not working for everyone, that if landlords choose not to access it, then their tenants aren't getting the benefit of it. So those are things that we are working on with our internally and then with our federal partners. But there are other issues like, the tourism industry and the hospitality industry is severely affected by the limitation on gatherings. And the question was, what is the government's view on the next phase and what will be in the next phases? So trying to provide visibility to businesses is something that I will be discussing with my colleagues.
Right. It's hard to do when you don't have that vision, right? You don't have
That's right.
You need a crystal ball.
Well, that's right. And people who are being called upon have to make important decisions for themselves, for their employees, for their communities, and their families. And so I know, and I heard loud and clear that people are looking for more visibility on what's next. And all I know is that what we need to do is make sure those numbers keep coming down before we move into the phase 2. But I will be able to discuss the need for visibility.
We have seen a lot of financial aid announced on all levels of government, but that really has helped businesses and organizations to have some peace of mind. Do you foresee that in the future as well? I mean, just as you have that crystal ball to kind of indicate what direction and what openings we should have, there's also that level of what are businesses going to need in 12 or 18 months from now.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on the business. It depends on the sector. Some businesses stayed open. Real estate agents continued to work. People involved in food supply, manufacturing were able to continue to stay open. That said, it doesn't mean that they were profitable, and there are often costs to staying open. So I know that others are going to have to rethink their business models completely. If you own a gymnastics studio and you take in kids for day camps, you still don't know what the summer is going to look like and how many kids can you have. What are the costs of keeping your facilities clean? So those are things that I know people will be thinking through and trying to plan for. But in terms of the supports that we need, a lot of it depends on the length of the health crisis itself. And so that's why following guidelines and trying to flatten the curve as quickly as possible is key. I do think, sadly, that some industries will feel the effects of this much longer than others, unfortunately. And there will be parts of our lives that will be changed until there are a vaccine, whether it's your reluctance to take public transit, your reluctance to get on a plane and go visit another city, another country, lack of tourism coming to Toronto as a result. Those kinds of things will have impacts on York-Simcoe, and there is, as you said, there's no crystal ball there. And so some businesses and some sectors will require more support than others. But hopefully being able to resume activity as quickly as possible and create economic growth is the best way we can get there.
We have seen the impact that COVID-19 has had on long-term care facilities, and unfortunately we've seen that in York-Simcoe as well. Just want to have your thoughts. We really have seen a community rally around River Glen Haven in Sutton amidst a lot of residents and a lot of workers there being positive with COVID-19.
What's happened with long-term care across the province has been devastating, and families have been devastated by losing loved ones. And it doesn't matter how old, and it doesn't matter how frail. It's always a great loss to these families, to these communities, and to our province. So we have committed to convening a commission to look into long-term care and what must be done to rectify some of these systemic and structural issues. We've known there's been a problem in long-term care in this province for a very long time, and unfortunately COVID-19 has really shone a light on it, and it has not been a good light. There is a great amount of momentum for setting things right, and the Ministry of Long-Term Care and the Premier have committed to taking steps. So we will be doing that as quickly as possible. But in the interim, the community support around River Glen Haven, for instance, has just been incredible. And it has been a very difficult situation there. I know, I've been there, I've spoken with residents and the people there, and so who are working there, so I know the trials. South Lake has stepped in, but at the same time, the support to really provide the governance that's required and the systems that are required to run the long-term care home in a way to meet the needs of the pandemic need to be reviewed. And so that's why just recently, in fact today, the government has issued a mandatory management order to allow South Lake to go in and provide that oversight, that management, and that governance that is so required at River Glen Haven. So I am very happy that South Lake has been a great partner so far, and it will continue to, but it's clear that we needed to take another step. So earlier in May, the government, we had issued an emergency order that allowed these MMOs, but it has now just been implemented for River Glen Haven, so South Lake can come in. And so a very sad situation. But in this case, I think the MMO is the right way to go. Now,
we only have a few minutes left, and I don't want to leave on a negative. I don't want to leave on a sad note. Part of the silver lining from some of the devastation, from some of the horrible stories that we're hearing, is the silver lining is the community and the rallying around a place like River Glen, the impact that the community is having on other organizations and their neighbors. You must be very proud of the riding that you represent.
It has been. There's two stories. There's the sadness and the difficulty that we're going through, but there are just these incredible stories of this Ontario spirit that the Premier talks about, we all talk about. And in York-Simcoe, there are just so many stories. There's the bakery store owner who continues to bake and drop off baked goods to frontline workers across the riding. There's the company that does marketing and printing that is helping businesses with this new reality of having to put in markers for physical distancing. people have gotten creative in their ways of supporting one another in this pandemic. And you never thought that, that these were the things that we were going to require, either from a comfort level or from a business level, but they are. And so there have just been so many examples like that of people really rising to the occasion. And I'm trying to highlight as many of these as possible. And so if you do know of people in York-Simcoe, in your community, that are rising to the challenge and making a difference, and either helping out in a way that they never thought because of this pandemic, please reach out to me and let me know, because I want to shine a light on those people, because it is nice in the middle of this to get some good news and to hear some good stories.
Right. Just 1 minute left. I want to ask you, because I know you spend a lot of your day asking people what they need. What do you need? Obviously those good stories is one, but is it feedback? Is it support? What do you need?
Well, I am very lucky that I have an incredible team working in my constituency office. And what we need is that we're here to help people in York-Simcoe. So we need to hear about your experiences and provide feedback on how the government is doing, and what gaps do you see in our policies that you would like us to fill, especially with respect to the programs and our response to COVID-19. So we would really like to be we want to be of assistance to you as much as possible. And that's either in answering your questions or, as I said, shining a light on businesses and the people in the community that are making a difference.
That's the perfect way to end this show. Thank you so much for joining us once again on Mind Your Business. We really appreciate it, and really appreciate the up-to-date information that you provide.
Thank you, Jennifer. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much to everybody at home for watching Mind Your Business. Don't forget, you can watch all of the episodes on Rogers TV Georgina or on the Rogers TV YouTube channel. For now, we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.